There's a man at the very end of all of this, kneeling on the floor of a ruined throne room while ash falls through the air like a slow gray snow. He's holding a woman against his chest. She's still warm, and the blood spreading across her gown is spreading because of him. Because of the small movement his hand made a few seconds ago. Because of the blade he slid between them while he was kissing her. He did it gently. That's the thing nobody ever talks about. He held her face, and he told her she was his queen, and then he killed her, and he kept holding her after, like a child who breaks something and tries to press the pieces back together before anyone notices. And here's the part that should make your stomach turn. The crown she died chasing, the iron chair melting in the dragon fire behind them, the entire kingdom she burned a city to take, by blood, by birth, by every law those people pretended to live and die for. All of it belonged to him. Not to her, to the quiet man holding the knife. He just never knew. For most of his life, people looked at him and saw the lowest thing a person could be. A bastard. A mistake somebody made and couldn't undo. He grew up answering to a name that wasn't a name at all. A name they hand out to children whose fathers won't claim them in front of their wives. Snow. Cold, white, and gone by afternoon. That's what they decided he was. And the truth that took him almost his entire life to learn, was the exact opposite of everything he'd been told. He wasn't a stain on an honorable man's reputation. He was a secret a dying woman whispered into her brother's ear with the last strength she had. He wasn't nobody's son. He was the only living trueborn heir to the most dangerous bloodline in the world. Exhales sharply. He was a king who spent every day of his life believing he was nothing. So how does that happen? How do you hide a crown inside a boy and convince him he's worthless and then watch what it does to him? How does a child raised on shame grow into a man so honorable that honor itself becomes the thing that destroys him? How do you go from sleeping at the far end of a cold table because you weren't allowed to sit with the family to standing over the corpse of the woman you loved, the realm saved, the throne empty, and feel like you've lost everything? To understand the man with the knife, we have to go all the way back. Back to the cold. Back to the beginning. Back to a name that was a lie before he ever learned to speak it. His story starts in the north. And in the north, it's always winter that's coming. There's a castle called Winterfell, an old gray fortress of stone and ice in the far north of a continent called Westeros, and it's been the seat of House Stark for thousands of years. The Starks are the kind of family that doesn't have to remind anyone how important they are. Their words aren't a boast. Their words are a warning. Winter is coming. It means prepare, endure. Remember that comfort is temporary and death is patient. The Starks rule the North the way a parent rules a difficult child, sternly, fairly, and with a kind of love that mostly shows itself as discipline. At the head of the family is Eddard Stark. Everyone calls him Ned. And Ned is, by every measure, a genuinely good man, which in this world is almost a tragic flaw waiting to happen. He's honorable to a fault. He keeps his word like it's the only thing holding the sky up. When the law demands an execution, he doesn't pay someone to do it. He swings the sword himself because he believes the man who passes the sentence should be the man who looks the condemned in the eye. That's who Ned Stark is. Remember that, because it matters. Almost everything Jon becomes, he learns from watching this one man try to be good in a world that punishes goodness. Ned has a wife, Catelyn, and a house full of children. Robb, the oldest, born to lead, easy and warm and golden in the way firstborn sons sometimes are. Sansa, the daughter who dreams of songs and southern nights and a gentler life than the North has ever offered anyone. Arya, wild and stubborn and far more interested in swords than sewing. Bran, the climber, the dreamer, and little Rickon, barely old enough to understand any of it. And then there's the other one, the boy who's the same age as Robb, almost to the season, raised in the same halls, fed at the same tables, taught by the same masters. He looks like a Stark. He has the long Stark face, the dark hair, the gray eyes, the quiet seriousness. He fights beside the Stark boys, prays in the Stark godswood, loves the Stark children like his own blood, because, in a way nobody will explain to him, they are. His name is Jon, but it isn't Jon Stark, it's Jon Snow. In the North, when a child is born outside of marriage, they don't get the family name. They get a placeholder. A label that follows them everywhere, that announces to every stranger in every room exactly what they are before they've said a single word. In the North, that label is Snow. And so this boy, raised inside the walls of one of the greatest houses in the kingdom, carries a name that exists for one reason only, to make sure he never forgets he doesn't fully belong. Ned brought him home as an infant years ago after a war. He told everyone the boy was his son, born of some woman during the fighting, and he refused to say more than that. He refused to name the mother. He refused to explain. For a man who built his entire identity on telling the truth, on never lying, on honor above survival, Ned Stark kept this one secret locked so tightly that he carried it for almost 20 years and very nearly took it to his grave. And that should tell you something. A man like that doesn't lie for sport. A man like that only lies when the truth would get someone killed. But Jon doesn't know any of that. Jon just knows the shape of his own loneliness. Imagine being a child and loving your family completely and feeling every single day in 100 tiny ways that you're a guest in your own home. Jon eats with the family, but when an important visitor comes, he's quietly told to sit elsewhere, out of sight, because his presence at the high table would be an insult to Lady Catelyn. He trains with the Stark boys, but he isn't a Stark. He calls Robb his brother, and Robb means it back, and yet there's always this invisible line drawn through the middle of the love, a line Jon didn't draw and can't erase. And the person who reminds him of that line most often, just by existing, is Catelyn. Now, it's easy to make Catelyn a villain here, and a lot of people do. But try to see it from inside her own grief for a second. Her husband rode off to war, and he came back with a baby in his arms and another woman's child pressed to his chest, and he wouldn't tell her who the mother was, and he insisted on raising the boy under their own roof, beside their own children, as an equal. Every day, Jon lives in that castle. He's living proof, or what she believes is proof, of the one time her honorable husband betrayed her. She doesn't hate Jon because he's a child. She hates Jon because of what she thinks he means. And a child can't tell the difference. A child just feels the cold. There's a moment, years before our story really gets moving, when Bran falls ill and Catelyn sits by his bed day and night, terrified she's going to lose him. And Jon, who loves Bran too, comes to say goodbye before he leaves Winterfell. And Catelyn, half out of her mind with fear, tells him he isn't wanted there. She tells him she prayed for it to be Jon who got sick instead of her son. To his face. To a boy who has never been anything but kind to her children. That's the water Jon Snow grows up swimming in. Love on one side, rejection on the other, and a name that constantly whispers, "You are less." And here's what's so quietly devastating about it. Jon never becomes bitter. He never turns cruel. He could have. A lot of people would have. Instead, he does something far harder and far more dangerous for his own heart. He keeps trying to be worthy of a family that won't fully claim him. He decides that if he can just be good enough, honorable enough, useful enough, maybe one day the line through the middle of the love will disappear. It never does. But the trying becomes who he is. Then one ordinary day, the children find something in the snow that's going to change all of their lives, though none of them know it yet. It's a direwolf, a dead one, an enormous mother, killed by a stag's antler, lying in the melting frost with a litter of pups still alive beside her body. Direwolves are creatures out of legend in the north, the sigil of House Stark itself. Animals that haven't been seen south of the Wall in living memory. And there are exactly enough pups for the Stark children. One for Robb, one for Sansa, one for Arya, one for Bran, one for Rickon. 5 trueborn Stark children, 5 direwolves. It feels like an omen. It feels like destiny pointing. And then someone finds one more. Off to the side, alone, separated from the rest, an albino, white fur, red eyes, the runt of the litter, the one that almost didn't make it. And Jon looks at this small white creature that doesn't quite fit with the others, that got pushed to the margins of its own family, and something passes between them. He names it Ghost, because it's white as snow, and because it almost never makes a sound. The quiet wolf for the quiet boy, the one that belongs and doesn't belong, all at once. Keep your eye on Ghost. He's going to vanish from this story for long stretches, and he's going to come back at the exact moments when Jon has forgotten who he is. Of all the relationships in Jon's life, and there are so many that end in blood, the wolf is the one constant. The wolf never lies to him. The wolf never asks him to be anything other than what he is. In the end, when everything else has been taken, the wolf is what's left. But that's a long way off. Right now, the world is about to crack open, because a rider comes to Winterfell with news that pulls Ned Stark out of his quiet northern life and into the deadly politics of the South. The king himself is coming to visit, a man Ned fought beside in a rebellion years ago, a man who now wants Ned to leave home, travel to the capital, and serve as his right hand, his hand of the king, the second most powerful position in all of Westeros. And Ned, who would give anything to stay home, says yes. Because he gave his word, because that's the trap honor sets for honorable men, it never lets them choose the safe thing. For Jon, this royal visit isn't about politics. It's about something much sharper and much closer to home. Because the king's arrival sets the whole family in motion, and in all that motion, a question that's been quietly growing inside Jon for years finally comes to a point. What is he supposed to do with his life? Think about it from his side. Robb will inherit Winterfell. He's the heir. That's settled. Sansa and Arya will be married off into other great houses. Bran and Rickon have their places. But Jon? A bastard can't inherit. A bastard can't lead. A bastard is tolerated, at best, and resented at worst, and the longer he stays, the more he becomes a problem somebody eventually has to solve. He's seen the looks. He understands the math. He knows that the kindest thing the world has on offer for a boy like him is to be forgotten quietly. So Jon makes a choice. And it's a choice that's going to define the entire first half of his life. He decides to go to the Wall and join the Night's Watch. And to understand what that means, what he's actually signing away, we need to talk about the Wall. Because it isn't just a career change, it's a kind of death he chooses while he's still young enough to want a life. The Wall is exactly what it sounds like, except bigger than your imagination wants to allow. It's a colossal barrier of solid ice, hundreds of feet high, stretching for hundreds of miles across the entire top of the continent, separating the kingdoms of men from the wild, frozen lands beyond. It was built thousands of years ago, and here's the detail that nobody pays attention to until it's far too late. It wasn't built to keep out raiders. It was built to keep out something much, much worse. something that for 8,000 years, almost everyone has comfortably agreed must be a myth. Guarding the wall is the Night's Watch. Once, it was a noble order, an army of disciplined men in black who held the line against the dark. But that was a long time ago. By the time Jon comes of age, the Watch has rotted into something closer to a prison sentence. It's where the kingdom sends its garbage, rapists, thieves, murderers, men given a choice between losing their head and putting on the black. A handful join out of honor. Most join out of desperation. The food is bad, the cold is worse, and the brotherhood is held together by a vow. And it's the vow that matters. Because when a man takes the black, he swears it for life. He gives up land, titles, gold. He gives up the right to marry, the right to father children, the right to ever go home. He gives up his family name. From that night until the night he dies, he is a man of the Night's Watch. And nothing else. There's no resignation. There's no retirement. There's no parole. The only way out is the grave. Now sit with what Jon is actually choosing here. He's a teenager. He's never kissed anyone. He's never held land or led men or lived a single day as anything other than the bastard at the cold end of the table. And he's looking at a future where the best he can hope for is a lifetime of contempt, and so he decides to trade it for a different kind of life. A harder one, a lonelier one. But one where, for the first time, the word bastard might not follow him. Because here's the strange, sad genius of his decision. On the wall, nobody cares who your father was. The vow erases everyone's past. The thief and the lord and the bastard all wear the same black, eat the same gruel, freeze in the same wind. Jon thinks he's running away from the shame of being a Snow. What he's really doing is running toward the one place in the world where being a Snow won't matter. Because there, nobody is anybody. He thinks it's freedom. He has no idea what it's going to cost him. There's a man at Winterfell during all of this who's worth pausing on, because he sees Jon clearly in a way almost no one else does. His name is Tyrion Lannister. He's the king's brother-in-law, brilliant, witty, perpetually drunk, and he's a dwarf, which in this world means he spent his entire life being looked at the way Jon gets looked at. As a flaw. As an embarrassment. As a thing other people wish were different. And maybe that's why, when Jon snaps at him, hurt and defensive, Tyrion doesn't snap back. Instead, he gives Jon a piece of advice that Jon is going to carry for the rest of his life, whether he wants to or not. He tells him to never forget what he is, because the rest of the world won't. He tells him to wear it like armor, so it can never be used to wound him. Wear it like armor. Take the thing they use to make you small, and make it the thing they can't break. It's the closest thing to a philosophy that Jon ever gets handed before he's truly tested. And the tragedy is that he spends years trying to live by it, trying to make peace with being a bastard, trying to turn the wound into something solid, never knowing that the word itself was a lie. There was no shame to armor against. The whole foundation of his self-image is built on a story Ned invented to keep him alive. But not yet. Right now, he just thinks a kind man gave him a kind truth. The goodbyes are the part that breaks you a little. Jon doesn't have many people to say goodbye to, but the ones he has, he loves with his whole heart. He goes to little Bran, who's recovering from the fall that nearly killed him. That's a whole other story. A story of a boy who saw something he shouldn't have, and Jon tells him goodbye with the quiet ache of someone who suspects he'll never see this child grow up. And then there's Arya. Of all the Stark children, Arya is the one who looks most like Jon, acts most like him, understands him best. She's a girl who refuses to be what the world insists girls have to be, and Jon is a boy who's been told his whole life what he isn't allowed to be, And somewhere in that shared stubbornness, they find each other. They're not just half-siblings. They're the same kind of outsider. So before he leaves, Jon gives her a gift. He's had a sword made for her in secret. A real one, slim and light, made for someone small and quick. And Arya, delighted, asks if it has a name, because all the best swords have names. And Jon tells her most swords are named after the things they're meant to do, or the people who wielded them. This one is named Needle, because every highborn girl is supposed to spend her days doing needlework, and now Arya has a needle of her own, and it will do a very different kind of stitching. It's a joke between them, a little act of rebellion they share. But hold on to that sword, because it's going to travel an unbelievable distance through this story, through years of horror, across a whole continent, and it's going to come back at the very end and decide the fate of the entire world. Jon gives Arya a toy. It becomes a relic. And then there's Ned. This is the conversation that haunts everything. Jon goes to his father, the only father he's ever known, and he asks the question he's been carrying his entire life. He asks about his mother. Who was she? Did she love him? Did Ned love her? Just a name. Just something to hold. And Ned looks at his son, this boy he raised and loved and lied to every single day. And he can't do it. He can't tell him. He says, the next time they see each other, he'll tell Jon everything. He promises. He says it like a man who fully intends to keep it. They never see each other again. That promise, the truth about who Jon really is, the secret that would have changed the entire shape of his life, dies with Ned Stark. And Jon rides north carrying a question that won't be answered for years and years, long after the man who could have answered it is dust in a crypt. He spends his whole life thinking his mother was nobody, a shame, a stranger. And the truth was that she was a Stark, that she was Ned's own sister, that the man Jon called father was actually his uncle, lying to protect him from people who would have killed a Targaryen child without a second thought. Exhales sharply. But Jon rides north believing he's just a bastard going to a frozen prison. And in a way, that one withheld truth is the great wound of his entire life. Not because he didn't have a family. Because he did, and they never let him know it. The journey north strips away whatever romantic ideas Jon had about the Wall. Up close, it's not a noble fortress full of heroes. It's a crumbling ruin manned by old men, criminals, and frightened boys. Most of the great castles along the Wall sit empty. The Watch, that once numbered 10,000 strong, now barely scrapes together a few hundred. It's a dying institution guarding against a threat almost no one believes in anymore. And Jon, who arrived expecting honor, gets a brutal reality check on his very first day in the training yard, because Jon is good. He grew up training with a master at arms at Winterfell. He spent years learning to fight properly. And the other recruits, the thieves and the orphans and the desperate, most of them have never held a real sword in their lives. So Jon beats them. Easily. Again and again. And for a moment it feels good. For a moment, he's the best at something. For a moment, he's somebody. Uncomfortable. And the master at arms, a hard, bitter man named Alliser Thorne, watches Jon strut around humiliating boys who never had a chance, and he gives him a nickname that's meant to cut. He calls him Lord Snow. A bastard mocked with a lordly title, the cruelest possible joke, throwing Jon's entire identity back in his face. And it works. It stings exactly the way it's meant to. But here's the moment Jon grows up. There's another recruit, a soft, heavy, terrified young man named Samwell Tarly, sent to the Wall by a father who was ashamed of having a coward for a son, and would rather his boy disappear into a frozen prison than embarrass the family. Sam can't fight. Sam can barely lift a sword. And the other recruits, egged on by Thorne, start beating him bloody in the yard for sport. And Jon, who's been the favorite punching bag of someone's contempt his entire life, looks at this trembling boy getting brutalized for the crime of being weak, and something in him refuses it. He steps in. He stops it. He decides, in that moment, that he's not going to be one more strong person standing on a weak person's neck. That's the turn. That's where the arrogant boy who came to the wall to prove he was somebody starts becoming the man who protects the people no one else will. Sam becomes his first true friend, not a brother by blood or obligation, but someone who chooses him, and whom he chooses back. And it's no accident that the first real friendship of Jon's life is born from him defending the underdog. He knows what it is to be the one everybody steps on. He just decided he'd rather be the one who steps in. Sam, by the way, is going to end up being the person who uncovers the single most important truth about who Jon really is. The cowardly boy Jon, saved in a muddy training yard, is going to hand him a crown made of words, years later, in a crypt full of dead Starks. But neither of them knows that yet. Right now, they're just two unwanted boys at the end of the world, learning to survive each other. When the training ends and the recruits take their vows, Jon expects to be made a ranger. The rangers are the ones who ride beyond the wall, who do the real work, who get to be heroes. Jon's the best fighter in his class. It should be obvious. Instead, he's made a steward, a glorified servant, assigned to attend the Lord Commander, to bring him his meals, keep his fires lit, look after his quarters. And at first, Jon is furious, certain it's one last insult, Thorne reaching out to humiliate him even now. He's ready to storm off and sulk. And it's Sam, of all people, who sees it clearly. Sam points out the obvious thing that Jon's wounded pride can't. Stewards to the Lord Commander aren't being punished. They're being groomed. The old man doesn't want a server. He wants to watch the most promising young man on the wall up close, every day, and decide whether he's worth shaping into the next leader of the Watch. Jon isn't being buried. He's being chosen. The Lord Commander is Jorah Mormont, a gruff, weathered old soldier they call the Old Bear, the kind of leader who's seen everything and still gets up every morning to hold the line one more day. And he takes Jon under his wing, teaches him, tests him, sees in this bastard boy something worth investing in. For the first time, an authority figure is treating Jon not as a problem to manage, but as a future to invest in. After a lifetime of being the spare, the extra, the one who didn't quite belong, somebody's looking at Jon Snow and seeing a leader. There's also a maester at Castle Black, an old, blind, ancient man named Aemon, who tends to the sick and keeps the order's books, and nobody pays much attention to old blind Aemon. But here's a secret the show plants quietly and lets you find later. Maester Aemon is a Targaryen. He was born a prince, an heir, generations ago, and he gave up his claim to the throne to serve at the wall. He chose duty over a crown. He chose to be nobody. And one day, much later, he's going to give Jon the most important piece of advice of his life about love and duty, and how a man can be torn apart between the two. Aemon knows that pain from the inside. He's been the man who chose the vow over everything his heart wanted. He just doesn't realize that the bastard steward he's mentoring is his own kin, the last living drop of the same blood Aemon walked away from. Two Targaryens, hiding in plain sight at the bottom of the world, neither one knowing what the other is. There's something almost unbearably sad about it. The old man who gave up the throne, teaching the young man who never knew he had a claim to it, both of them pretending to be nothing. Both of them so much more. Then, one night, the wall stops being a story about ambition and starts being a story about survival. 2 rangers who'd gone missing beyond the wall are found dead and brought back to Castle Black. Their bodies are laid out, cold, gone, and in the dead of night, they get back up. Not as men. As whites, corpses with burning blue eyes, animated by something that has no business existing, moving with a horrible wrongness, impossibly strong, feeling no pain, unkillable by ordinary means. One of them goes straight for Jorah Mormont's chambers, for the Lord Commander, for the old man Jon has come to respect more than almost anyone. And Ghost, silent, watchful Ghost, is the one who senses it first, scratching and snarling at the door, dragging Jon out of sleep just in time. Jon runs into that room and finds a dead man with glowing eyes, a corpse that won't stop coming no matter how many times he cuts it. Steel does nothing. Strength does nothing. And in a flash of desperate instinct, Jon grabs a burning lamp and throws fire at the thing. And it burns. Finally, it burns and screams and falls. Exhales sharply. Jon Snow has just killed his first dead man, and in doing so, he's seen with his own eyes the thing the entire Night's Watch exists to stop. The thing the whole kingdom has spent 8,000 years laughing off as a children's tale. The dead are walking. Something out there in the cold is bringing them back. And almost nobody south of the wall is going to believe it for years. This is one of the great quiet themes of Jon's whole life, and it starts right here. He keeps seeing the truth before everyone else. He keeps trying to warn people about a threat they refuse to take seriously. And he keeps getting punished for it, distrusted, undermined, sometimes hated, for the crime of being right too early. The loneliness of being the only one who sees what's coming becomes its own kind of cold he has to live inside. In gratitude for saving his life, the old bear gives Jon something extraordinary: his own family's ancestral sword, a blade of Valyrian steel, incredibly rare, lighter and sharper and stronger than any ordinary weapon, forged with techniques the world has mostly forgotten. It's called Longclaw, and Mormont has the pommel reforged into the head of a wolf in Jon's honor. Think about what that gift means to a bastard. A family sword is supposed to pass from father to son, down the trueborn line, for centuries. It's the most concrete symbol of belonging a noble house has. And Jon Snow, the boy who was never given his father's name, who was never going to inherit anything, who grew up believing he'd never be anyone's heir, is handed a great house's heirloom by a man who's not even his blood. It's the family Jon was never quite given, offered to him at last, by choice instead of birth. He'll carry that sword through every horror still to come. And much, much later, he's going to learn it's one of the only weapons in the world capable of killing the things he's been fighting from the very beginning. Valyrian steel kills the dead. The dead are coming, and the bastard with no name is one of the only men holding a blade that can stop them. And then, just as Jon is starting to find his footing, just as the wall is starting to feel like a place where he might actually become someone, the world he left behind catches fire. Word reaches Castle Black that his father, Ned Stark, has been arrested in the capital, accused of treason. And then word comes again. Worse, Ned has been executed, beheaded on the steps of a temple in front of a screaming crowd, on the order of a cruel boy king, after being promised mercy that never came. The most honorable man Jon has ever known. The father who promised to tell him the truth the next time they met. Dead. Murdered for trying to do the right thing in a place that punishes it. And the promise, the truth about Jon's mother, gone forever, or so it seems. And then more news. Robb, Jon's brother, the boy he grew up beside, has called the banners of the North. He's raised an army. He's marching south to avenge their father and save their sisters, who are trapped in the capital. The North is at war. His family is bleeding. And Jon Snow is hundreds of miles away, sworn by an unbreakable oath to stand on a wall and guard against a threat no one believes in, while the people he loves ride into battle without him. So Jon does the only thing his heart will allow. He breaks. He gets on a horse in the dead of night, and he deserts the Night's Watch to go join his brother's war, to go fight for his family, to go be a Stark for once instead of a Snow on a wall. It's the most human decision he's ever made. And it's a death sentence. Deserters from the Watch are hunted down and executed without exception. There's no forgiveness. There's no second chance. Jon is throwing away his life and his honor in one ride through the dark. And here's where his friends save him. Sam, Gren, Pipe, the brothers he's made at the wall, they ride out after him into the freezing night. They don't drag him back. They don't threaten him. They just catch up to him, and they start reciting the words. The vow. The oath every man of the Watch swears. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. They say it to him, line by line, in the dark, until Jon remembers who he chose to be, and he turns the horse around. He goes back. He swallows the most painful thing a person can swallow, the knowledge that the people he loves are in danger, and he has chosen, deliberately, not to go to them. He puts the vow above his own blood. He puts duty above love. Exhales sharply. Remember this moment, because Jon Snow is going to be forced to make this exact choice. Love or duty, family or oath, the heart or the world, over and over and over again for the rest of his life. And it's never going to get easier. The first time, his friends ride out and save him from himself, but there's a final time, years from now, in a throne room full of ash, when no one rides out, and there's no one to recite the words, and the choice between love and duty comes down to a single movement of his hand. He starts learning it here, in the snow, at 16. He doesn't finish learning it until it kills the woman he loves. With the dead rising and entire ranging parties vanishing into the cold, the old bear decides the Watch can't just sit behind its wall and wait. They need to go out there and find out what's happening. So a great force of Black brothers rides north, beyond the edge of the known world, into the true wild, and Jon goes with them. What's out there is a whole other world that the South has conveniently forgotten exists. Because beyond the wall live the wildlings. They call themselves the Free Folk, and they've lived in those frozen lands for as long as anyone can remember. Fierce, independent, unbowed, refusing to kneel to any king or lord. To the people of the kingdoms, they're savages, raiders, monsters to frighten children with. But they're just people. People the wall was built to keep out, living their whole lives in the shadow of a barrier raised specifically to declare them unwelcome in the world. And here's a thread to pull on. The wildlings are the ultimate outsiders, a whole people defined by the world's refusal to let them belong. So of course, Jon Snow, the bastard who never belonged anywhere, is going to end up understanding them better than any other man of the Watch. He doesn't know it yet, but he's riding toward the people who will teach him the hardest, most expensive lessons of his life. About love, about leadership, about what it costs to do the right thing for people everyone else has decided don't deserve it. The Free Folk are uniting, for the first time in centuries, under a single leader, a man called Mance Rayder. And here's the part that should make your skin prickle. Mance is a former man of the Night's Watch. He took the same vow Jon took. He wore the same black. And he walked away from it, and crossed to the other side, and made himself a king. The king beyond the wall. He's gathered tribes that have hated each other for generations into one massive host. And they're not raising that army to raid a few villages. They're running. They're fleeing south toward the wall, away from something in the deep north that terrifies even them. Because the dead are coming for everyone. And the free folk know it. They'd rather climb over the wall and beg the people who despise them for shelter than stay out there and become part of the army of corpses. The wildlings aren't the threat. They're refugees fleeing the real one. And almost nobody on Jon's side is willing to see the difference. Jon gets attached to an elite group of rangers led by a hard, scarred veteran named Qhorin Halfhand, one of the most respected men in the Watch, the kind of soldier whose name gets spoken with awe. And Qhorin gives Jon a crash course in the brutal arithmetic of survival beyond the wall, where honor is a luxury and the only thing that matters is the mission. Their patrol runs into a group of wildling scouts, and in the fighting, Jon ends up alone with a captured wildling he's supposed to kill. And he can't do it. Because the wildling is a young woman, red-haired, fierce, mocking, completely unafraid even with a sword at her throat. Her name is Ygritte, and when Jon hesitates to kill her, when his decency gets in the way of his duty, she escapes, and Jon chases her, and the two of them get separated from his group, lost in the endless white together. And this is where Ygritte starts doing the thing she's going to do for the rest of their time together. She teases him, relentlessly. She finds this serious, brooding, honorable boy from the South absolutely hilarious, so sure of himself, so convinced he understands the world, so utterly clueless about everything that actually matters out here in the cold. And every time he acts like he's got it all figured out, she hits him with the same line. The line that becomes the truest thing anyone ever says about him. You know nothing, Jon Snow. And the maddening, wonderful thing is, she's right. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know what it is to be free of all his rules. He doesn't know what it is to be wanted by someone who has no reason to want him, except that she does. He doesn't know what it is to choose love. Not yet. Ygritte's whole gift to him is that she sees through every layer of duty and shame and seriousness he's wrapped around himself, and she finds the actual person underneath, and she likes that person. She likes Jon. Not Lord Snow, not the steward, not the bastard. Jon. He's never had that. In his whole life, nobody has ever just wanted him. Then Qhorin finds them, captured, both of them, surrounded by wildlings, and Qhorin, knowing they're as good as dead, makes a desperate gamble. He needs someone on the inside of Mance's army. He needs a spy. And the only way to get Jon accepted by the free folk is to make Jon prove he's truly turned his cloak, truly abandoned the Watch. So Qhorin attacks Jon. In front of the wildlings, he picks a fight, and he forces Jon to kill him, sacrificing his own life so that Jon can plunge a sword into a respected brother of the Night's Watch and earn the trust of the enemy with that blood. Uncomfortable. Sit with what that does to a boy like Jon. He's just been ordered, by a man he admires, to murder him, and to live afterward knowing that everyone who hears the story will believe Jon Snow killed Qhorin Halfhand out of cowardice or betrayal. He has to carry the appearance of being exactly the thing he most fears being, a traitor, a man without honor. He has to lie with his whole body, every day, surrounded by people who'd gut him the second they suspected the truth. He has to become a liar to serve the truth. And it's eating at him, because lying is the one thing Ned Stark's son was raised never to do. This is the world quietly teaching Jon its hardest lesson, the lesson that's going to define his entire tragedy. Honor and survival don't always fit together. Sometimes the right thing requires you to look like you've done the wrong thing. Sometimes duty demands deception. And Jon, who built his whole identity on being honorable like his father, is being slowly, painfully shown that the world Ned believed in, the world where honor protects you, that world is a fairy tale. Honor got Ned's head cut off. Honor is going to cost Jon almost as much. So Jon lives among the wildlings as a false defector, and the longer he does, the more complicated everything in his chest becomes. Because he's supposed to be playing a part, but you can only pretend to live a life for so long before the line between pretending and living gets blurry. He's brought before Mance Rayder, and Mance, sharp, charismatic, dangerous, sees through a lot of Jon immediately but takes him in anyway. And Jon starts to see the free folk not as monsters, but as people. Families, children, old men and women who just want to survive the winter. He sees their courage and their loyalty and the way they choose their leaders by merit instead of birth, which, to a bastard who was denied everything because of his birth, is intoxicating. Out here, a man is what he makes himself. Out here, nobody would ever call him Lord Snow as a joke. And he falls in love with Ygritte. Really, completely in love. There's a moment that becomes the most tender of his entire life. The two of them get separated from the others and find shelter in a cave, warm against the cold, hidden from the whole brutal world for a little while. And there, for the first time, Jon breaks his vow, the vow he turned a horse around in the snow to keep, the vow that forbids him to ever touch a woman. He chooses Ygritte. He chooses love over the oath. He lets himself be happy, just once, fully and without conditions. And Ygritte, lying there with him, tells him she wishes they could stay in that cave forever. Just the two of them, away from his wall and her war, and all the things waiting outside to tear them apart. She wishes they never had to leave. They have to leave. They always have to leave. Remember that wish, because she's going to say it one more time, years worth of pain from now, with an arrow in her chest, dying in the arms of the man she loved on opposite sides of a battle neither of them wanted. We should have stayed in that cave. It's the saddest sentence in his whole story, and the first time we hear it, it sounds like happiness. But Jon is living a double life, and double lives have a way of demanding payment. To prove himself completely, he's brought along on the wildlings' boldest plan. A small party is going to climb the wall itself, not go through a gate. Climb. Hundreds of feet of sheer ice, with nothing but picks and ropes and raw nerve, in a screaming wind, to slip behind the Watch's defenses and open a gate for the army coming behind them. It's one of the most harrowing sequences imaginable. Jon and Ygritte clinging to a wall of ice taller than any mountain, the rope between their group snapping, men plunging to their deaths, the whole sheet of ice shearing and shifting beneath their hands. At one point, Jon and Ygritte are dangling by a single line over a drop that would kill them instantly, and Jon has to make a choice in a half second about who to save and how. They make it. Bloodied, frozen, exhausted, they pull themselves over the top and stand on the other side. And for one perfect moment, looking out over the world from the highest point either of them has ever stood, Jon kisses her in the wind, and it feels like they've climbed out of their old lives and into a new one. It's a lie, though. The same way everything is a lie right now. Because Jon is still a man of the Night's Watch in his heart. He's still loyal to the wall, to the vow, to the people Ygritte's army is marching to slaughter. And every day he spends loving her, the moment is getting closer when he's going to have to choose. Her, or his duty. The woman who loves him, or the brothers he swore to protect. Exhales sharply. And we already know which one Jon Snow chooses. He always chooses duty. It's the most admirable and the most heartbreaking thing about him. He will break his own heart, again and again, on the altar of the right thing, and the people who love him will be the ones who pay. The choice comes faster than he's ready for. The wildling raiding party Jon's attached to descends on a small village south of the wall, and they cut down everyone in it, including in front of a terrified young boy named Ollie, the boy's own father. They leave Ollie alive, on purpose, to carry a message of fear back to Castle Black. Hold that boy's face in your mind. Ollie, a child who just watched his family butchered by wildlings, who saw Ygritte loose the arrow, who's now running to the only refuge left to him, the Night's Watch. He's going to grow up in Jon's shadow. He's going to look at Jon as a kind of older brother, a protector. And he's going to put the last knife in Jon's back. Everything that destroys Jon at the wall traces back to this one raid, this one orphaned boy, this one wound that never heals. But the immediate crisis is Jon's. Because the raiders want him to do what they did, to kill, to prove once and for all that he's one of them and not a spy. And Jon can't. He won't murder innocent people to maintain his cover. The lie has reached its limit. The part of him that's still Ned Stark's son refuses to cross that final line. So he runs. In the chaos, Jon breaks away and rides hard for Castle Black to warn them that Mance's enormous army is coming, that the wall is about to be attacked from both sides, that everything is about to break. He chooses the Watch. He chooses duty. He abandons the free folk, and he abandons Ygritte. And she comes after him, not the way his brothers came after him in the snow that night, reciting the vow to bring him home. Ygritte comes with a bow. Because in her eyes, he didn't just leave, he betrayed her. He made her love him while he was lying about who he was the whole time. And there's a moment, as he's fleeing, where she has a clear shot at him, where she could end it, and she draws the arrow back, and she looks at him down the length of it, and her aim wavers. She shoots him, but not to kill. She puts arrows in him, 3 of them, and lets him ride away wounded. Because even now, even furious, even betrayed, she can't actually make herself end him. That's the cruelty of it. They both still love each other. They're just on opposite sides of a war that doesn't care. Jon makes it back to Castle Black barely alive, and he arrives just in time to find the Watch leaderless and unprepared for the storm that's coming. Because the old bear is gone. While Jon was beyond the wall, there was a mutiny. A group of brothers turned on Jorah Mormont and murdered him, the man who took Jon under his wing, who gave him a family's sword, who saw a leader in a bastard, dead, betrayed by his own. And notice the pattern starting to harden here. The people who lead the Watch keep getting murdered by the people they lead. The Brotherhood is rotten. The vow holds the men's bodies together, but not their loyalty. And Jon is about to walk straight into the center of all that rot. But first comes the worst night the Wall has seen in generations. Mance's army arrives, tens of thousands of wildlings, plus giants riding mammoths, plus monstrous creatures out of Nightmare. And they assault Castle Black from the north, while a raiding party hits it from the south. A few hundred exhausted, frightened Black brothers against a horde. Jon, despite holding no official rank, takes command in the chaos, because he's the only one who actually knows the enemy, who's lived among them, who understands how they fight. And he's magnificent in it, calm in the storm, decisive, brave, leading from the front, holding the gate, holding the line, refusing to let his brothers break. This is the first time the whole Watch sees what Jon Snow can be when everything is on fire, a leader men will follow into death. The bastard nobody wanted is the man holding the wall together with his bare hands. And then, in the middle of the battle, Ygritte finds him. She has an arrow knocked. She's aiming at him, again. And this time there's a war raging all around them, men dying everywhere, and she has every reason and every right to finally take the shot. And Jon turns and sees her. And for a second, the whole battle goes quiet between them, just the two of them looking at each other across everything that's broken. And before she can decide what she'll do, an arrow takes her. From behind. From the boy. From Ollie, the orphan child Jon saved a place for, avenging the family she helped kill. Ygritte falls into Jon's arms, and the battle keeps screaming around them, but for them, the world has narrowed to this, and she looks up at him, dying, and she says it. The thing from the cave. We should have stayed in that cave. And then she tells him, gently, like a last gift, "You know nothing, Jon Snow." The same words she opened with. The first thing she ever said to tease him becomes the last thing she ever says to love him, and then she's gone. He holds her after she dies, the way he's going to hold someone else after he kills them, years from now, in another doomed place. Jon Snow's great loves all end with him cradling a body. Ygritte was the one who taught him he was allowed to want a life of his own, to be happy, to be chosen, to be loved for nothing more than himself. And the world took her in front of him, killed by a child Jon had pitied, in a war neither of them believed in. The first time he let himself choose love over duty, this is what it got him. He's going to remember that. It's going to make him careful with his heart in a way that costs him, later, when there's something even bigger to lose. The wildlings would have overrun the wall completely, but they're saved, at the last moment, by an army nobody expected. A claimant to the throne named Stannis Baratheon, a grim, rigid, deeply serious man who believes it's his destiny to be king, sweeps in with his forces and shatters Mance's host. Stannis is the only southern lord who took the threat in the north seriously enough to actually come north and do something about it. And in doing so, he changes the entire course of Jon's life. Because Stannis sees Jon. He watches this young man, this bastard who led the defense, who knows the wildlings, who understands the real enemy beyond all the petty wars, and he decides Jon is exactly the kind of man he wants on his side. And he offers Jon something almost beyond imagining. Stannis offers to make Jon a Stark. Not figuratively. Legally. Officially, Stannis offers to legitimize Jon, to wipe away the bastardy with a royal decree, to give him the name Stark, to make him Jon Stark, Lord of Winterfell, the seat of his family, the home he was raised in and never allowed to truly claim. Stop and feel the size of this. This is everything. This is the wound at the very center of Jon Snow's entire existence. The thing he's wanted since he was a small boy sitting at the cold end of a table. To belong. To be a Stark. To carry his father's name. To be a son instead of a stain. It's the dream he gave up on so completely that he buried himself alive in a frozen prison rather than keep wanting it. And now a king is standing in front of him offering it on a silver plate. All Jon has to do is say yes, and Jon says no. Exhales sharply. He turns it down. Because the very same night Stannis makes the offer, the brothers of the Night's Watch hold an election for a new Lord Commander, and against all odds, they choose Jon. The bastard. The one Thorne mocked, the one half of them distrusted, the youngest commander the Watch has had in centuries. It comes down to a tie, and the deciding vote is cast by old blind Maester Aemon, the secret Targaryen, casting the breaking vote for the secret Targaryen he doesn't know he's voting for. Two of the last Targaryens in the world, and one of them just made the other the leader of the Night's Watch. And neither of them has the faintest idea. So Jon chooses the vow over the name. Again, he's offered the one thing he wanted his whole life, to be Jon Stark, and he gives it up to honor a duty to a dying brotherhood that mostly resents him. He chooses to remain a Snow, forever, because he made a promise. And there's something almost unbearable about it in hindsight. He turns down the Stark name to stay true to his oath, never knowing that his real name was never Stark in the first place. He's not Ned Stark's son. The name he sacrificed everything to earn the right to refuse was never even truly his to take. The whole dream he's been chasing and renouncing his entire life is built on a lie his father told to save his life. Jon Snow keeps making the noblest choices a man can make in service of an identity that doesn't exist. That's the engine of his tragedy. He's the most honorable man in the story, navigating his whole life by a map that's wrong. As Lord Commander, Jon makes the hardest decision of his young life, and it's the decision that gets him killed. He decides to make peace with the wildlings. Think about how insane this sounds to his men. The free folk have been the enemy for thousands of years. They just attacked the wall and killed dozens of brothers. There are men at Castle Black whose fathers and grandfathers died fighting wildlings, men who lost friends days ago in the battle. And Jon stands up and says, "We're going to let them through. We're going to give them shelter. We're going to bring them south of the wall, into the very land we swore to defend against them." But Jon's seen the real enemy with his own eyes. He knows that every wildling who dies out in the cold doesn't just die, they rise again, as a soldier in the army of the dead. He knows that the Night King and his horde are coming, and that every corpse left beyond the wall is a future weapon turned against the living. The math is brutal and simple. Save the wildlings or hand them to the enemy as reinforcements. Jon chooses to save them, not out of love for the free folk, though he does love them now, but because it's the only choice that doesn't doom everyone. And here's the thing about Jon Snow that keeps repeating until it finally kills him. He's right. He's almost always right. But being right and being followed are two completely different things, and Jon never quite learns the difference. He keeps making the correct, far-sighted, deeply unpopular choice, and he keeps assuming that because it's correct, the men around him will eventually understand. He trusts that truth is enough. It isn't. The men don't see a leader saving them from extinction. They see a commander betraying everything they swore to protect, cozying up to the people who murdered their brothers. The resentment builds. And Jon, focused on the bigger threat, doesn't take it seriously enough. Old Maester Aemon, near the end of his long life, gives Jon a piece of advice that the young commander doesn't fully absorb. He tells Jon he'll have to lead, and that doing the right thing will make a great many people hate him, and that the loneliness of command is its own kind of wound. He tells Jon to kill the boy inside himself, the part that wants to be liked, that wants to belong, that flinches from being despised, and let the man be born. Because a leader who needs to be loved can't do what leadership demands. It's wise. It's true, and it's the very thing Jon can never quite do. Because the boy who spent his whole childhood aching to belong can't simply switch off the wanting. He keeps reaching for his men's understanding even as he makes decisions that guarantee they'll never give it. The wound that made him kind is the same wound that makes him vulnerable. He leads with his heart in a world that punishes exposed hearts. And then comes Hardhome. And Hardhome changes everything. Jon takes a small force by ship to a wildling settlement on the coast, far beyond the wall, to evacuate as many free folk as he can before winter and the dead arrive. He's there to save lives, to load thousands of refugees onto boats and bring them south to safety. And he's in the middle of arguing with skeptical wildling elders, trying to convince them to trust him. When the temperature drops, the dogs go silent, and an avalanche of snow rolls down the mountain toward the settlement. And then the dead come. Not a few whites, not a raiding party, an ocean of them. Tens of thousands of reanimated corpses pouring over the walls, an unstoppable tide of the dead crashing into a settlement full of living people who have nowhere to run. It's chaos and slaughter and pure animal terror. And up on the cliffs above it all, watching, stand the White Walkers, the ancient, beautiful, terrible commanders of the dead, and at their head, the Night King himself. Jon fights his way through the massacre, trying to get his people to the boats. And he ends up face to face with a White Walker, and his sword, Longclaw, the Valyrian steel blade given to him by the Old Bear, meets the Walker's ice weapon. And instead of shattering, instead of dying, Jon shatters the White Walker. The creature explodes into shards of ice. Valyrian steel kills them. Jon discovers, in the worst moment of his life, the one weapon that can fight back. Exhales sharply. But it's not enough to save Hardhome. Most of the people there die. And as Jon and the survivors row out to sea, exhausted and broken, the Night King walks calmly to the edge of the water, looks Jon dead in the eye across the freezing distance, and raises his arms. And every single person who just died, every wildling, every man, woman, and child slaughtered on that beach, stands back up. Thousands of them. Eyes burning blue. A whole new army born in an instant from the bodies of the people Jon came to save. The Night King doesn't say a word. He just lifts his arms and shows Jon, personally, what he is. He shows him that death itself is on the other side of this war, that every loss feeds the enemy, that the dead don't need to win, they only need to wait, because everyone joins their ranks eventually. Jon sails away, having seen the true face of the apocalypse, and he carries that image, the arms rising, the dead standing, the silent stare, for the rest of his short life. Nothing else ever scares him the same way again. After Hardhome, Jon Snow knows exactly how the world ends. And the unbearable irony is that the men at home will murder him for trying to prevent it. Because while Jon was at Hardhome watching the end of the world, the resentment back at Castle Black curdled into something murderous. Bringing the wildlings through the wall was the final straw. To a faction of brothers led by Alysser Thorne, the same man who mocked Jon as Lord Snow on his first day, Jon Snow is no longer just an unpopular commander. He's a traitor. A bastard who turned the Watch against everything it stands for, who opened the gates to the enemy, who has to be stopped. And they decide to stop him the way the Watch always seems to stop its leaders. With knives. The way the worst things in Jon's life always do. He's lured out into the courtyard with a lie. A brother tells him there's news of his long-lost Uncle Benjen, the ranger who vanished beyond the wall years ago. The one piece of family Jon still hopes might be alive. Jon, who would walk into anything for the faint hope of family, follows. And there's no news. There's just a sign nailed to a post, with one word painted on it: traitor. And then the knives come out. One by one, his own brothers step forward and stab him. Each one says the same thing as he drives the blade in. For the Watch. For the Watch, as if murdering him is an act of loyalty, as if killing the man who saw the truth is how you save the truth. Thorne. The others. Jon staggers, bleeding, betrayed by the brotherhood he chose over his own family, over the Stark name, over the woman he loved, over everything. And then there's one more. A small one. The boy. Ollie steps forward, the orphan Jon protected, the child Jon gave a home to, the boy who looked at Jon like a father. And Ollie looks Jon in the eyes, and he puts his knife into Jon's heart, and he says it too. For the watch, and Jon Snow falls into the snow, looking up at the sky, his blood steaming in the cold, surrounded by the men he died trying to save. The bastard who never belonged anywhere. The boy who turned down a name and a home and a love to honor a vow. Murdered by the very brotherhood he sacrificed everything for. His eyes go still. His blood pools black in the snow. Jon Snow is dead. Now, most stories, that's the end. The hero gives everything, does the right thing, and is murdered by small men too frightened to understand him. A tragedy with a clean, terrible shape. And for a while, that's exactly what this looks like. But Jon Snow's story doesn't end with his death. It barely even pauses. Because death, it turns out, is not a door that only opens one way in this world. And what comes back through that door is going to be the same man, and not the same man at all. Something is missing in him afterward. Something that doesn't come back. And learning to live with that absence becomes the quiet, haunted center of everything Jon Snow does for the rest of his life. He's about to find out that the worst thing isn't dying. The worst thing is being dragged back afterward, and remembering that there was nothing waiting for you on the other side. A small group of men, loyal to Jon, recover his body before the murderers can burn it, and they lock themselves in a room with the corpse, holding off the killers, not even fully sure why. And among them is a strange figure, a red priestess named Melisandre, a servant of a fire god, a woman who deals in prophecy and resurrection and things most people in this world don't believe are real. She washes his body. She trims his hair and his beard. And she leans over the corpse of Jon Snow and whispers ancient words in a forgotten tongue, asking her god to give him back. And nothing happens. She tries again. Nothing. The men watching lose hope and file out of the room, leaving her alone with the dead. And Melisandre, who has staked her entire faith on the idea that this man matters to the fate of the world, sits there defeated, certain she's failed. And then, in the empty silence, after everyone's given up, Jon Snow gasps. His eyes fly open. His body lurches up, gulping air, terrified, reaching for a wound that's still raw. He's alive. Against every law of nature, against the finality of death itself, the bastard who was murdered in the snow is breathing again. But he doesn't come back whole. And this is the part of his story that so many people skip past, but it might be the most important thing that ever happens to him. Because the first thing anyone wants to know is the obvious question. What did you see? When you were dead, what was there? Heaven? Your father? Something? Anything? And Jon's answer is the most chilling line in his whole life. He says there was nothing. Nothing at all. No light, no peace, no reunion, no meaning. Just nothing. Imagine carrying that. Jon Snow is the only person in this entire story who knows, for an absolute fact, that there's nothing on the other side of death. No reward for honor. No reunion with the people you've lost. No grand purpose revealed. He gave his life believing, the way honorable men have to believe, that it meant something. And he came back able to confirm that it didn't. That death is just an off switch. That all his sacrifice bought him nothing but a cold black silence. And it breaks something in him. The Jon who comes back is quieter, heavier, There's a hollowness behind his eyes that wasn't there before. He moves through the rest of his life like a man who's already seen the ending and knows there's no comfort in it. The boy who ached to belong, who fought so hard to matter, he died believing his life had a meaning, and he woke up knowing it didn't. That weariness never fully leaves him. From here on, Jon Snow is a man who's tired of dying for things, because he knows now, better than anyone, exactly what dying gets you. His first act back among the living is a grim one. He has the men who murdered him hanged: Thorne, the others, and the boy, Ollie. He gives them the chance to say their last words, and Thorne, defiant to the end, tells Jon he'd do it all again, that he made the only choice he could. Ollie says nothing at all. He just glares, and Jon hangs them, including the child, and watches them die. Uncomfortable. It's a terrible thing to watch, the execution of a boy, even a boy who put a knife in your heart. But Jon does it the way Ned taught him, looking the condemned in the eye, passing the sentence and seeing it through. And then he does something no one expects. He takes off his black cloak. He hands command to someone else, and he tells them his watch has ended. And technically, he's right. The vow is for life, and Jon Snow died. The oath bound him until death, and death came and went. He fulfilled it, literally, completely. He's the only man in the history of the Night's Watch to ever truly complete his vow and walk away free. And so, for the first time since he was a teenager, Jon Snow is no longer a man of the Watch, no longer bound, no longer anything. Just a man who died and came back, with nowhere to go and no idea who he is anymore. He's been a bastard, a brother, a spy, a lover, a commander, a corpse. And now he's none of those things. He's a blank. And into that blankness walks the one person who's going to give him a reason to live again. She arrives at the gate half frozen, having escaped a nightmare of her own. It's Sansa. His sister, well, his cousin, though neither of them knows it yet. The little girl from Winterfell who once dreamed of southern nights and gentle songs, grown now into a woman who's survived horrors Jon can barely imagine. A hostage in the capital, married off to monsters, brutalized by a sadist named Ramsay Bolton, escaped at last across the frozen wild to the only family she has left. And the reunion is one of the most quietly moving moments in the entire story. Because Jon and Sansa were never close as children, she was a proper highborn lady, he was the bastard she barely thought about. And now, here, at the end of everything, having both lost almost everyone they ever loved, they fall into each other's arms and just hold on. Two survivors, two halves of a shattered family. For Jon, who's just learned that death is empty and that he no longer belongs to any vow or order, Sansa is suddenly a reason, a purpose, a piece of home that walked back into his life when he had nothing left. And Sansa wants to take back Winterfell. The Boltons hold their home now. Ramsay, the sadist who tortured Sansa, sits in the castle where Jon and Sansa grew up. And Sansa won't rest until it's theirs again. So Jon, exhausted, hollowed out, sworn off of dying for causes, agrees to fight one more war. Not for a vow, not for a throne, for family, for home. For the one thing he's wanted since he was a small boy at the cold end of the table. They ride across the north, scraping together an army from the few houses still loyal to the Starks. And here's where Sansa shows she's learned hard lessons of her own. She secretly sends for help from a powerful army called the Knights of the Vale. But she doesn't tell Jon, because she's learned not to trust anyone completely, even him. Hold on to that, because it's going to save Jon's life, and it's also a quiet sign of how the war has changed both of them. The battle for Winterfell becomes one of the most brutal, claustrophobic, terrifying battles ever put on screen. And before it even begins, Ramsay does something monstrous to break Jon's mind. He has a hostage. Rickon, Jon's youngest brother, the last trueborn Stark son, a boy who was barely more than a toddler when Jon left for the Wall, now a frightened young man at the mercy of a sadist. And Ramsay, in front of both armies, releases Rickon and tells him to run to Jon. The boy sprints across the open field toward his brother, toward safety, toward Jon's outstretched arms, and Ramsay calmly knocks an arrow and starts shooting at him, toying with him, playing a game. And Jon, watching his little brother run for his life, does the only thing his heart will let him do. He charges. He spurs his horse out alone across the field to save Rickon, every instinct screaming, closing the distance, and Ramsay's arrow finds Rickon's heart just steps from his brother's reach. The boy falls dead in the dirt, and Jon's whole army has no choice but to charge after their commander into a battle that's now a chaotic, full-scale disaster. And that's the trap. Ramsay knew Jon would do exactly that. He knew Jon couldn't watch his brother die without throwing himself forward, and he used Jon's love against him to lure the whole Stark army onto open ground, where they could be surrounded. Jon's greatest strength, his heart, his fierce loyalty to his family, is the exact lever his enemy pulls to nearly destroy him. It's a lesson the whole world keeps teaching him. In this place, love is a weakness others can hold a knife to. The battle that follows is a nightmare of mud and blood and bodies. Jon's outnumbered, surrounded, the Boltons closing in like a vise, and in the worst moment, Jon is knocked down in the press of the retreat, and the panicked, dying men of his own army trample over him, crushing him into the mud, and he's buried alive under a mountain of bodies, clawing toward the surface, drowning in the dead. Exhales sharply, the man who died once already, fighting his way up through a heap of corpses just to breathe. It's a brutal echo, Jon Snow, suffocating under the weight of death itself, refusing to stay down. And he breaks the surface, gasping, the same way he gasped back to life on Melisandre's table. He will not stay buried. Whatever else is true about Jon Snow, the man does not stop getting up. And then the horns sound. The Knights of the Vale, the army Sansa secretly summoned, crash into the Bolton flank and shatter them. The battle turns. The Starks win Winterfell back, and Jon corners Ramsay and beats him bloody with his bare fists, pounding the sadist's face into ruin before he remembers Sansa and stops and leaves the final justice to her. Sansa has Ramsay's own starving hounds released into his cell, and she watches the man who tortured her get devoured by the beasts he prized, and she walks away with the faintest, coldest smile. The North is theirs again. Home, after everything, after the Wall, the wildlings, Ygritte, the knives in the dark, the empty black of death, Jon Snow finally walks back through the gates of Winterfell, the place he was raised and never allowed to fully claim. And the Northern Lords, gathered in the Great Hall, do something that should have been impossible for a bastard. Led by a fierce young girl, Lyanna Mormont, who shames the grown men for their cowardice, they rise to their feet and proclaim Jon Snow the king in the North.
Bastard. The bastard.
The boy from the cold end of the table. A king. They lift him up and roar his name, and he sits there, stunned, the weight of it settling onto a man who never once asked for power and keeps having it pressed into his hands anyway. It should be the happiest moment of his life, the ultimate vindication, the ultimate belonging. And yet, watch his face. There's no triumph in it, just a kind of bewildered exhaustion. Because Jon Snow has learned, the hard way, again and again, that every time the world hands him power, it's also handing him a fresh way to lose everyone he loves. The crown they're cheering for is just the beginning of the longest, darkest, and most heartbreaking chapter of his entire life. And it starts with a queen, across the sea, riding 3 dragons, a woman he's about to fall in love with, who happens to be his own aunt and who he's eventually going to have to kill. To understand who that queen is, you have to know there's a whole war for the Iron Throne happening far to the south, in the warm and golden lands Jon's never really cared about. And rising out of the east is Daenerys Targaryen, the last surviving child of the dynasty that ruled Westeros for 300 years before being overthrown. The dynasty Jon's father supposedly helped destroy. She spent her whole life in exile, sold and abused and underestimated, and she's clawed her way up from nothing to become a conqueror with 3 living dragons, a massive army, and an unshakable belief that she was born to sit the Iron Throne and break the wheel of cruelty that's crushed people like her for generations. And here's the cosmic joke that nobody's laughing at yet. Daenerys believes she's the last Targaryen. The only one. The end of the line, fighting to reclaim her family's stolen throne. She has no idea, none, that the brooding king in the north she's about to summon is actually her own blood. Her nephew. The trueborn son of her older brother. The one person alive with a stronger claim to the throne than hers. 2 of the last Targaryens in the world are about to meet, fall in love, and go to war against the dead together, and the truth sitting underneath all of it is a bomb with a very long fuse. Jon needs her. That's the brutal practicality of it. The Night King is coming, the dead are coming, and Jon knows that swords and walls won't be enough. He needs dragonfire. He needs dragonglass, a volcanic stone that, like Valyrian steel, can kill the dead, and which sits in mountains of it beneath Daenerys' island fortress, Dragonstone. So the king in the north swallows his pride and travels south to meet the Dragon Queen, to beg an alliance from a woman who demands he kneel before he's even finished his sentence. Their first meetings are all friction. She wants him to bend the knee, to acknowledge her as his queen, the way every other lord eventually does. And Jon, who never wanted to be a king, who keeps trying to tell her about the only war that actually matters, refuses again and again, because he won't pledge his people to someone who doesn't believe the real threat is real. They circle each other, 2 stubborn idealists, each convinced the other is missing the point. He thinks she's chasing a throne while the world ends. She thinks he's chasing a children's story while a real war is fought for a real crown. But slowly, something shifts. Because they recognize something in each other. 2 people who came from nothing, a bastard and an exile, who clawed their way to power they never started with, who lead because their people chose them and not because they were born to it, who both carry the weight of trying to do right by the helpless in a world that eats the helpless alive. They're the same kind of leader, the same kind of lonely, and the more time they spend together, the more the friction turns into something warmer. To prove the threat is real, Jon does something almost suicidally brave. He leads a small band of fighters beyond the wall into the frozen heart of the Dead Lands to capture a single white and drag it south as living proof, to show the Queen and the realm, with their own eyes, what's coming for all of them. It goes wrong, the way these things always go wrong for Jon. The group gets trapped on a frozen island in the middle of a lake, surrounded by the entire army of the dead, freezing and starving and certain they're going to die out there in the white. And it's Daenerys who saves them. She comes herself, on dragonback, raining fire down on the army of the dead to pull Jon and his men out of the trap. And the dead make her pay for it, because the Night King, calm as ever, hurls a spear of ice across the sky, and it strikes one of her dragons, one of her children, out of the air. Jon watches the great creature scream and bleed and crash into the frozen lake, dying, sinking beneath the ice. Daenerys watches her child die in front of her, and something in her cracks that never fully heals. And the dead aren't done with that dragon. Later, The Night King walks out onto the ice and raises the corpse the same way he raised the people at Hardhome, and now the army of the dead has a dragon of its own, a creature of ice and death that's going to bring down the wall itself. The single most powerful weapon the living possess turned into the enemies. Jon's worst nightmare made worse. In the chaos of the escape, Jon falls through the ice into the freezing water and is nearly lost, and he's saved at the last second by a figure out of his past. His uncle Benjen, the ranger who vanished beyond the wall years ago, now something between living and dead himself, who appears out of nowhere to pull Jon free and sacrifice himself so his nephew can escape. The family Jon kept hoping was alive, found at last only long enough to die saving him. Even his rescues are tragedies. But out of all that loss comes the turn that defines the rest of his life. On the ship sailing back from the failed mission, with one of her dragons dead because she came to save him, Daenerys sits at Jon's bedside as he recovers from nearly freezing to death. And in that quiet, broken moment, two leaders who've each given everything, each lost so much, Jon finally bends. Not just the knee, the heart. He pledges himself to her, and she to him, and they fall completely, helplessly in love. On a boat, in the dark, Jon Snow lets himself choose love one more time. And as their bodies come together below deck, the story does something unbearably cruel. Because elsewhere, at that exact moment, two other men are piecing together the truth of who Jon really is. The voices overlap, Jon and Daenerys falling into each other, and the revelation falling into place, and the audience realizes the horror a beat before either lover possibly could. They are aunt and nephew. The love that's saving them both is built on a secret that's going to poison everything. Jon Snow has chosen love over duty for the second time in his life. And just like the first time, in a cave beyond the wall, it's going to end with him holding a body. The truth comes to Jon in the worst possible place, at the worst possible time, from the two people least likely to lie to him. His brother Bran, who is no longer really Bran, but something stranger now, a being who can see across all of time. Every moment that ever happened has watched the secret unfold with his own impossible eyes. He saw a wedding nobody recorded in a quiet southern tower years ago, and his old friend Sam, the cowardly boy Jon saved in a muddy training yard a lifetime ago, has read it in a dusty old record kept by a high priest, the official proof of that secret marriage. Two unwanted boys from the bottom of the world, reunited at Winterfell, holding between them the most dangerous fact in the kingdom. And they take Jon down into the crypts of Winterfell, where the cold stone chamber, where the dead Starks lie among the bones of their ancestors, where the statue of his aunt Lyanna stands watching, and they tell him his father, Ned Stark, was not his father. Ned was his uncle. The woman in the crypt, Lyanna Stark, Ned's beloved younger sister, was Jon's mother, and his father was Rhaegar Targaryen, the crown prince of the very dynasty Jon was raised to believe were the villains of the realm. Rhaegar and Lyanna weren't enemies. They were married, in secret, for love, and Lyanna died giving birth to their son, and with her dying breath, she begged her brother Ned to protect the child, because a baby with Targaryen blood in the aftermath of that war would have been murdered in his crib by the men who'd just taken the throne. So Ned took the infant home, and he told the world it was his bastard. He let his own honor be stained, let his wife believe he'd betrayed her, let a whole kingdom whisper about his one shameful mistake for almost 20 years to keep one promise to a dying sister. The lie that defined Jon's entire life, the lie that made him the bastard at the cold end of the table, was the single most honorable thing Ned Stark ever did. He carried it to his grave. He died with that secret rather than risk the boy's life. exhales sharply. And here's what it actually means, stripped of all the names. Jon Snow was never a bastard. Jon Snow is Aegon Targaryen, the trueborn son of the Crown Prince, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Not just a king, the king. The legitimate claim that outranks everyone. Daenerys, the woman he loves, the queen he bent the knee to, the conqueror with the dragons, her entire claim to the throne is weaker than his. He doesn't just have a place in the realm, he has the highest place in it. And watch what this revelation does to him. Most people, told they were secretly the rightful king, would feel something sore in them. Jon feels the ground fall away because everything he thought he knew about himself is a lie. His name is a lie. His father is a lie. His shame was a lie, and so was the long, lonely identity he built on top of that shame. The bastard who wore his bastardy like armor the way Tyrion told him to all those years ago. There was nothing to armor against. And worst of all, the woman he loves, who's just sailed north to risk everything fighting for his home, is his aunt. The love is now a wound. The truth he spent his whole life wanting has arrived as a curse. Jon doesn't want the throne. He's never wanted any throne. He turned down the Stark name. He never asked to be Lord Commander. He had to be talked into being king in the North. Power keeps chasing this man, who only ever wanted to belong somewhere quiet and cold. And now he holds the biggest claim of and all it does is threaten the woman he loves and complicate the only war he actually cares about. He learns he's a king, and his very first instinct is to wish he'd never been told. But there's no time to grieve who he was, because the dead have arrived. The Night King and his endless army finally reach Winterfell, and the largest battle in the history of the living unfolds in a single endless night, the Long Night. Everyone Jon has ever fought beside stands together in the dark. The Starks, the Wildlings, the Dragon Queen and her armies, old enemies become desperate allies, all of them shoulder to shoulder against the tide of the dead. And it's not enough. The dead pour over the walls and through the gates in numbers no army could hold. Dragons clash in the freezing sky. The living are pushed back and back and back until there's almost nowhere left to stand. Jon fights through it like a man possessed, trying to reach the Night King himself, because he understands, the way he's always understood the things others miss, that this enemy isn't an army you can outlast. There's a single mind behind it. Kill the Night King, and every corpse he's ever raised falls dead in the same instant. So Jon hurls himself toward that one figure across a battlefield of horror, and he can't get there. The Night King raises the dead of Winterfell's own crypts behind the living lines. The slain rise to fight again. A wounded dragon blocks Jon's path with a wall of flame, and the man who's been right about this war from the very beginning is left screaming in the dark, unable to reach the one thing that would end it. And that's the final, quiet humbling of Jon Snow. He spent his whole life as the one who saw the threat first. The one who tried to warn everyone. The one who suffered for being right too early. He's earned the right to be the hero who ends it. The story owes it to him. And the story doesn't pay, because it isn't Jon who kills the Night King. It's Arya, his little sister. The wild girl he gave a sword named Needle to, all those years ago, in a warm room in Winterfell, before either of them knew what the world had in store. She comes out of the dark in total silence, the same way Ghost moves, and she drives that Valyrian dagger into the Night King, and the entire army of the dead collapses into bone and dust in a single breath. The whole apocalypse ended by the smallest, quietest Stark, with skills she spent years in agony learning. And there's something perfect and painful about that. Jon doesn't get to be the chosen one. Jon spends his whole life carrying the weight of the war against the dead. And in the end, He's not the blade that ends it. He's one of the thousands who held the line long enough for someone smaller and quicker to slip through the dark. Maybe that's the truest thing about him. Jon Snow was never the hero of the story. He was the man who kept the story alive long enough for the real hero to arrive. And he'd have told you that's exactly how it should be. But surviving the dead turns out to be the easy part. Because now the war for the living begins, and in that war, the people Jon loves are going to turn on each other, and the secret of who he really is going to spread through the kingdom like a slow poison, and the woman he loves is going to start coming apart at the seams. The longest night is over. The darkest one is still ahead. After the dead are defeated, the Alliance turns its eyes south, toward the capital, toward the cruel queen, who still sits the Iron Throne, Cersei Lannister, who refused to send a single soldier north while the world hung in the balance. Daenerys means to take the throne she's spent her whole life dreaming of. And Jon, having bent the knee, marches with her. But something has shifted, and everyone can feel it, because the secret is out. Jon told his sisters the truth of his birth. He had to. He couldn't lie to family. The lie was the thing that ruined his own childhood, and he refuses to build his new life on another one. But Sansa doesn't keep it. The whisper spreads, sister to advisor, advisor to spy master, until the most dangerous fact in the kingdom is loose in the world. And Daenerys feels the ground shifting beneath her feet. The throne she's bled for, the destiny she's organized her entire identity around, suddenly belongs by right to the quiet man she loves. The one person she trusted completely is now, through no fault of his own, the single greatest threat to everything she is. And Jon, who keeps telling her he doesn't want it, who keeps insisting she's his queen, can't make the threat go away just by not wanting the throne, because it was never about what Jon wants. It's about what other people will do with the truth of him. He's a claim with legs, a crown that walks around refusing to be a crown, and every lord in the realm who'd rather follow a man than a foreign conqueror now has a name to rally behind whether Jon likes it or not. His very existence undermines her, and there's nothing he can do to stop it except cease to exist. And Daenerys is losing everything else at the same time. Her closest friends die one after another, an old knight who loved her, an advisor murdered, a second dragon shot screaming out of the sky by an ambush, her dearest companion captured and executed in chains in front of her eyes while she watches, helpless from across the water. Grief piles on fear. The people she came to save look at her with suspicion instead of love. The man she loves pulls away from her, partly out of the strangeness of the truth, partly out of his own northern reserve, and won't give her the warmth she's desperate for. She came west believing she'd be greeted as a liberator, and instead she finds herself isolated, surrounded by people who fear her, betrayed and bereaved and increasingly alone, holding the most destructive power the world has ever known with fewer and fewer reasons to hold it back. And Jon watches it happen. He watches the brilliant, idealistic woman he fell in love with start to come apart. And he doesn't know how to save her. Because the thing breaking her is partly him, his blood, his claim, his coldness. He is, without ever meaning to be, one of the weights pulling her under. The final assault on the capital begins, and against all odds, it's over almost before it starts. Daenerys' last dragon burns through the city's defenses, the enemy army throws down their swords, and the great bells of the city ring out, the signal of surrender. The battle is won. The throne is hers. All she has to do is accept it. And she doesn't. Whatever was holding her together finally lets go. All the grief, all the fear, all the rage at a world that's taken everyone she loved and now refuses to love her back, it breaks loose. And she turns her dragon on a city that has already surrendered. And she burns it. Not the army. Not the queen in the keep. The people, mothers, children, the helpless thousands in the streets who had nothing to do with any of it. She rains fire down on a defenseless city, street by street, until the capital becomes an inferno, a hell of screaming and ash and falling stone, the Liberator transformed into the very kind of monster she spent her whole life vowing to destroy. And Jon is down in those streets when it happens. He watches the fire fall. He watches the woman he loves murder a city of innocents from the sky. He watches his own soldiers, swept up in the slaughter, start cutting down surrendered men and terrified families, and he tries to stop them, screaming at his own men to stand down, pulling them off their victims. And he can't. He can't stop any of it. He stands in the burning ruin of everything, ash falling around him like snow, and he understands, with a sick and final certainty, what has happened. The war against the dead was supposed to be the end of the darkness. Instead, the darkness just changed shape. It put on the face of the person he loves most. And he knows what he has to do. He knows it the way he's always known the hard truths first, before anyone else, the way that's cost him his whole life. He just doesn't want to know it. He goes to her, through the ruined, smoking city, past the melted gates, into the throne room where she's finally reached the iron seat she's chased across continents and oceans and years. Snow is falling through the shattered roof, real snow, ash and winter mixed together, and she stands before the throne, triumphant, transformed, talking about all the other cities she'll liberate, all the other places she'll burn free, the whole world remade in fire whether it wants to be or not. She isn't a tyrant in her own mind. She's a savior who's decided that the cost of saving the world is simply more ash. And she wants Jon beside her. She tells him they'll do it together. She tells him to rule with her, to build the good world with her, to trust that she alone knows what's good. And Jon loves her. That's the thing that makes this the worst moment of his entire life. He hasn't stopped loving her. He pleads with her, be the woman I fell in love with, choose mercy, stop. And she can't, and she won't. And he can see in her eyes that the woman he loved is mostly gone, replaced by someone who will keep burning the world for as long as she draws breath, certain the whole time that she's the hero. So Jon makes the choice he's been forced to make his entire life: love or duty, the heart or the world. His friends rode out to remind him of it in the snow when he was 16. He chose duty over Ygritte and held her while she died. He chose it again and again, the vow over the name, the war over his own comfort, the truth over his own happiness. And here, at the very end, in a throne room full of falling ash, with the woman he loves in his arms, there's no one to ride out and recite the words. There's just Jon, and the oldest choice in his life, one final time. He tells her he loves her. He kisses her. And while he's holding her, while their lips are still touching, he slides a dagger between them, into her heart, and he holds her as she dies, the same way he held Ygritte beyond the wall, the same way he held nothing in the cold black of his own death. The woman who pulled him out of the frozen lake with her dragons, who fell in love with the bastard king from the north, who wanted nothing more than to build a kinder world and burned a city to ash trying, dies in the arms of the man who loved her most, killed by the one person she trusted to never harm her. And her last dragon comes. It nudges her body, trying to wake her, the way the dead dragon at the lake had once been raised by ice. And then it screams and turns its fire not on Jon, but on the throne. The Iron Throne. The chair every war in this story was fought to win. The seat that drove a queen mad and ate 100 lives. the dragon melts it into a puddle of slag, as if even the beast understands that the throne itself was the disease all along. And then it gathers up its mother's body and flies away, north, out over the sea, and is never seen again. Jon Snow is left alone in the smoking ruin of the world he saved twice over, holding a knife, having killed the last two great evils of his life with his own hands, the King of the Dead's war by holding the line for Arya, and the Dragon Queen's reign by holding her as he ended it. He saved the world. And it cost him absolutely everything. Again. They take him prisoner. Of course they do. Daenerys' grieving armies want his head for killing their queen. His own family wants him spared. And in the end, the great lords of the realm gather to decide the future, and they choose a new kind of king. Not a conqueror, not a warrior, but Jon's own brother Bran, the boy who can see all of time. A king with no desire for power and no children to fight over the crown after him, chosen precisely because he doesn't want it. The wheel Daenerys swore to break gets broken after all, just not by her, and not the way anyone imagined. And Jon's punishment, the compromise that keeps his head on his shoulders and keeps the peace, is almost unbearably poetic. They send him back to the Night's Watch. Back to the Wall. Back to the cold, frozen, lonely place where his whole story began, to live out his days guarding the edge of the world, exiled from the family he killed for, sworn once again to a vow he already died fulfilling once. The man who was secretly the rightful king of all Westeros ends his story stripped of everything. No throne, no name, no love, no glory. Sent back to the bottom of the world in disgrace, the only reward for a lifetime of choosing duty over his own heart. By every measure the world uses to keep score, Jon Snow lost. He lost his father, his lovers, his place, his queen, and the truth of himself, and he ends with nothing but a black cloak and a wall of ice. And yet, there's a final image. Before he goes north, Jon says goodbye to his sisters, to Sansa, who'll rule the north as its own queen, free at last, and to Arya, who's sailing west to the edge of every map, off to discover what's out past the last known shore. 3 orphans from Winterfell, scattered to the corners of the world, each carrying their pieces of a family that the world tore apart. And Jon takes the Black Road north for the last time. But the Night's Watch sentence turns out to be a technicality, the same way it was once before, because there's no war left to guard against, and the wall has fallen. And the free folk, his free folk, the people he died to protect, the people the whole world spent 8,000 years building a wall to keep out, are going home, beyond the wall, back into the true north where they were always meant to be. And Jon goes with them. At the gate, before he leaves the known world behind, his direwolf is waiting for him. Ghost. The silent white wolf from the very beginning, the runt of the litter, the one that didn't quite fit with the others, the one Jon found alone in the snow when he was just a boy who didn't quite fit either. Earlier, broken and grieving, Jon had sent Ghost away without so much as a touch, too hollow to say goodbye. And now, at the very end, he kneels down and presses his face into the wolf's fur and holds him, the way he should have all along. The one creature in his entire life who never lied to him, never asked him to choose, never wanted him to be anything other than exactly what he was. And then he walks out through the gate, at the head of the free folk, into the endless white of the true north, the same wild, free, unbowed land where he once climbed a wall of ice with a girl who loved him, where he learned what it meant to be wanted, where the only people who ever fully accepted him have always lived. And as they walk north into the wilderness, the snow that has covered everything for the entire length of his story begins, in one small patch of earth, to give way. A single shoot of green pushes up through the white. Spring. Finally, coming after the longest winter. Life. Returning to a world that thought it would only ever know death. And that's where we leave him. Not on a throne. Not with a crown. Not even with a name that was ever truly his. Just a man in a black cloak, walking into the cold beside a silent white wolf and the only people who ever let him belong. Leaving behind every kingdom and every title and every burden the world tried to press onto his unwilling shoulders. Because here's the thing about Jon Snow. The thing his whole impossible life was quietly trying to teach us. The world spent his entire existence telling him what he was. A bastard, a brother, a traitor, a commander, a corpse brought back, a king who never wanted to be one, a killer of the woman he loved. Everyone had a name for him, a label, a box. And almost every single one of those labels was wrong, or a lie, or a burden someone else needed him to carry. And in the very end, he sets all of it down. He walks away from the great game entirely, away from the throne that was rightfully his, away from the power he never wanted, away from the South and its golden lies, and he chooses, for the first time in his whole life, the only thing he ever actually wanted underneath all of it. Not to rule, not to win, just to belong somewhere, to someone, free of every name the world ever tried to nail to him. He goes home to the cold, where the only people who ever truly saw him are waiting. And maybe, after a lifetime of dying for things, that's the closest a man like Jon Snow ever gets to peace. He was the king who chose to be no one. The hero who never wanted to be the hero. The bastard who turned out to be the most legitimate man in the realm and walked north anyway, into the snow, with his wolf at his side and the truth of who he was finally, blessedly, behind him. He came into this story as a boy with a name that wasn't real, sitting alone at the cold end of a long table. And he leaves it as a man who finally understood that the table was never the point. Some lives are a quick, bright tragedy. His was something slower and stranger and in its quiet way far more human. A long road through the cold with a great deal of dying along the way and a single green shoot of mercy waiting at the end of it. A short story told long. And then, at last, the wolf, the snow, and the going home. Goodbye, Jon Snow. You knew more than they ever gave you credit for.